What if Kawasaki brought back a motorcycle in 2026 that completely ignored modern trends? No giant TFT displays, no complicated electronic rider aids, no oversized adventure bike bodywork pretending to be ready for the apocalypse. Just a lightweight, simple, rugged dual sport built for one thing only: pure riding. Because honestly, that idea alone already makes the 2026 Kawasaki KE175 one of the most interesting comeback concepts imaginable. And I'll be honest right away, this bike would not be perfect. In fact, some riders would absolutely hate it. But at the same time, other riders would completely fall in love with it. And that's exactly what makes motorcycles like the KE175 special. The first thing people would notice immediately about a modern KE175 is how light it feels. Modern motorcycles are getting heavier every year. Bigger fuel tanks, larger engines, more electronics, more features, more screens, more everything. But the KE175 should go in the complete opposite direction. And honestly, that's one of its biggest strengths. Because lightweight motorcycles create a completely different riding experience. You don't wrestle with them. You don't feel intimidated by them. You don't need to mentally prepare yourself before every ride. You just get on and go. And personally, this is one of the biggest reasons I genuinely be excited for a bike like this. Because lightweight bikes make riding feel natural again. You see a random dirt road, you take it. You spot a narrow trail, you turn in without hesitation. You want to explore somewhere unfamiliar, the bike actually encourages it. And that feeling is something many modern motorcycles are slowly losing. Now, another huge advantage would be how approachable this bike could feel. A lot of beginner motorcycles today are easy to ride, but honestly, kind of forgettable. They're safe, smooth, and predictable, but they don't really have personality. The KE175 could be different. Because even if Kawasaki modernizes it, the bike still needs character. And that character would likely come from simplicity, lightweight handling, and mechanical feedback. And honestly, I think that matters more than horsepower. Because memorable motorcycles are not always the fastest ones. Sometimes they're just the ones that make you smile the most. Now let's talk about simplicity, because this could become one of the biggest selling points of the entire motorcycle. Imagine this: fuel injection, reliable suspension, basic digital display, LED lights, electric start. And that's it. No giant menus, no endless electronics, no confusing riding modes, no software controlling every part of the experience. And personally, I think that sounds incredibly refreshing, because modern motorcycles sometimes feel like they're trying too hard to become technology products instead of motorcycles. But the KE175 should feel mechanical, direct, connected. The kind of bike where you actually feel involved in the ride instead of just supervising electronics. And honestly, I think a lot of riders miss that feeling more than they realize. Now, another realistic advantage would be ownership costs. And this is important because motorcycles are becoming expensive, not just to buy, but to maintain too. But a KE175 would likely stay simple and affordable. Smaller engine means lower fuel consumption. Simpler components mean cheaper repairs. Lightweight chassis means less wear on tires, brakes, and suspension. And honestly, that practicality matters more than people admit. Because most riders don't just want exciting motorcycles. They want motorcycles they can actually afford to use regularly. Now let's talk about where this bike would truly shine. Real roads. Not perfect roads. Not racetracks. Not smooth highways. Real roads. Broken pavement. Potholes. Village roads. Gravel sections. Dirt paths. This is exactly where lightweight dual sports become amazing. And honestly, I think people underestimate this. Because a lightweight motorcycle often handles rough roads better than large, expensive bikes simply because it's easier to control. You stop worrying about damaging the bike. You stop stressing about road conditions. You just ride, and that changes the entire experience. Now here's another thing I personally think would make the KE175 special. Confidence. Smaller dual sports build confidence incredibly fast because they don't intimidate you. You try new things. You take more risks. You experiment with off-road riding. And because the bike feels manageable, your skills improve naturally. That's especially important for newer riders. But honestly, even experienced riders can enjoy that feeling too. Because lightweight motorcycles reconnect you to the basics of riding. No distractions, no unnecessary power, just balance, control, and feel. And personally, I think that's where real motorcycling lives. But now let's be completely honest. Because this bike would absolutely have weaknesses too. And some of them would be impossible to ignore. The biggest weakness would probably be highway performance. A 175 cubic centimeters class dual sport is simply not designed for long-distance high-speed highway riding. Sure, it could probably survive highways when necessary, but cruising comfortably for hours at modern highway speeds, that's not what this bike is built for. And honestly, some riders would hate that immediately, especially riders used to larger adventure bikes or powerful street motorcycles. Because once you get used to effortless highway performance, smaller motorcycles can feel limited. And that's fair. Another issue is stability at speed. This is the trade-off lightweight motorcycles always face. They feel amazing in cities and off-road because they're agile and responsive. But at higher speeds, strong wind, rough pavement, and large vehicles can make them feel nervous. You gain maneuverability, but you lose some long-distance stability. And honestly, that's just physics. Now let's talk about power, or more specifically, the lack of it. A bike like the KE175 would probably struggle with heavy passengers, luggage, or steep highways. Could it still do those things? Sure. But would it feel effortless? Definitely not. This bike would work best when ridden light and simple, exactly the way it was originally intended. Now here's another thing some riders would criticize immediately: the lack of advanced features. Compared to modern motorcycles, the KE175 would likely feel extremely basic. No cruise control, no traction control, no advanced ride modes, no giant TFT display, no premium electronics package. And honestly, some people would absolutely call that outdated. But personally, I think that simplicity is actually part of the charm. Because not every motorcycle needs to become a luxury machine. Sometimes riders just want something honest. Now, off-road capability is another area where expectations would need to stay realistic. Even though this is a dual sport, it probably wouldn't become a hardcore enduro machine. It would likely handle trails, gravel roads, forest paths, light off-road exploration beautifully. But deep mud, extreme hill climbs, motocross-style jumps, or highly technical terrain, that's probably beyond what this bike is designed for. And honestly, that's perfectly okay. Because the KE175 should stay true to what it always was: a practical dual sport, not a race bike pretending to be practical. But here's the biggest challenge of all: modern emissions regulations. And honestly, this is where things could get complicated. Because the original KE175 had real two-stroke personality. It felt raw, mechanical, aggressive, alive. But modern regulations make recreating that feeling incredibly difficult. And here's my personal concern. If Kawasaki makes the engine too smooth, too quiet, or too refined, there's a real risk the bike loses its soul completely. Because motorcycles like the KE175 are supposed to have personality. They're supposed to feel imperfect in the best possible way. And honestly, that kind of character is becoming rare. Now, here's the funny thing about motorcycles like this. Some riders would dismiss it immediately because of the engine size. People today are obsessed with horsepower numbers. Bigger engines, more speed, more technology. But honestly, I think that mindset completely misses the point of motorcycles like the KE175. Because this bike isn't about dominating roads, it's about enjoying them. And personally, I think there's something incredibly important about that difference. The 2026 Kawasaki KE175 would never become the fastest motorcycle. It wouldn't be the most advanced. It wouldn't be the most powerful. But honestly, it might become one of the most enjoyable motorcycles to actually live with. The kind of bike you ride more often than expected. The kind of bike you take out just for a short ride and somehow end up riding for hours. The kind of bike that reminds you motorcycling is supposed to feel fun, not complicated. And honestly, that matters way more than spec sheets ever will. So here's the real question. Would you choose a motorcycle like this today? A lightweight, simple, mechanical dual sport focused more on feeling than technology? Because I'll be honest, I absolutely would. Not because it's the fastest, not because it's impressive on paper, but because it feels real. And sometimes, that's exactly what riders are looking for. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Acer Rider for more motorcycle deep dives like this. And quick disclaimer, the 2026 Kawasaki KE175 discussed here is a conceptual interpretation inspired by the original KE series and modern dual sport trends. It is not officially confirmed by Kawasaki, because sometimes the best motorcycles aren't the ones trying hardest to become the future. They're the ones reminding us why we fell